A forgotten clay tablet holds the secrets of a lost global economy. These ancient records are more than artifacts. They are the blueprints of entire civilizations, detailing the precise flow of goods across deserts and seas. We will explore 30 specific clay tablet archives that reconstruct these vanished supply chains. By the end, you will see the ancient world not as a collection of ruins, but as a dynamic network of trade and logistics that rivals our own. How did a merchant in Anatolia get tin from a mine thousands of miles away? What did it take to keep a Bronze Age empire fed and armed? The answers are etched in clay, waiting to be read. What do you think drove these ancient people to document their world with such meticulous care? Under the scorching Mesopotamian sun, a merchant presses a reed stylus into a soft clay tablet. Each precise mark captures a transaction, a promise of goods to be delivered. This simple act, repeated countless times across the Bronze Age, was nothing less than the invention of the economy itself. In the great city-states of Sumer and Akkad, clay was more than just dirt. It was the hard drive of its day, the physical medium for the world's first data. They used a script called cuneiform, a complex system of wedge-shaped impressions that recorded everything from the number of grain shipments due to the palace to the quality of copper ingots arriving from distant mines. This was not casual note-taking. It was the foundational layer of an entire civilization, the operating system that made complex society possible. At the heart of this system were the great institutions, the temples and palaces. These were the central hubs of economic activity, functioning like massive corporations. They owned the land, stored the surplus, and organized the labor. To manage this immense complexity, they employed professional scribes, highly trained individuals who could turn the chaos of commerce into orderly columns of numbers and lists. These records were meticulously organized and stored in vast archives, the ancient equivalent of a server farm. Archaeologists like Dr. Irving Finkel have spent decades piecing together how these archives worked, revealing a level of bureaucratic sophistication we rarely attribute to the ancient world. Consider the archives unearthed at the city of Uruk, one of the world's first major urban centers. The tablets found there show early, systematic attempts at inventory management. They did not just count things, they categorized them, noted their quality, and tracked their movement from field to storeroom to distribution point. They developed standardized measures for weight, volume, and area, creating a common language of value that allowed for fair trade across the entire region. Think about that for a moment. How did the very invention of writing revolutionize trade? It created trust and accountability over distance and time. A merchant could travel for months, and the record of his debt or his promised delivery remained, baked hard and permanent. The parallels to our own world are striking. Is this so different from the digital logs that track a package from a warehouse to your doorstep today? These clay tablets were the first links in a global chain, a system of documentation that would eventually span continents. These archives were not random piles of discarded paperwork. They were the meticulously organized nerve centers of ancient commerce. Imagine a single room buried for millennia, its shelves lined with hundreds of clay tablets, each one a single piece of a massive economic puzzle. This is a clay tablet archive. For our purpose of rebuilding lost supply chains, we are not talking about random finds or epic poems like Gilgamesh. We are looking at concentrated collections of raw economic data. These tablets are the receipts, the contracts, the shipping manifests, and the ledger entries of their day. economic historians like Professor Michael Hudson describe them as ancient databases, the essential tools that allowed state and temple economies to function on a grand scale. They did not just store these records haphazardly. They were systematically categorized, often by the regnal year of the king, by the type of commodity like barley or copper, or by the specific trading partner or city. They were stored in specific administrative buildings, the offices of the officials who managed the flow of wealth, and this is where perspective becomes everything. A royal archive found in a palace gives us a top-down view of the entire economy, detailing taxes collected and rations distributed to workers. A temple archive reveals how a religious institution managed its vast lands and resources. But perhaps most revealing are the private merchant archives. One beautiful example comes from the old Assyrian period, from a merchant named Ashur-Nadar. His personal archive, found in his house in the Anatolian city of Kanish, details his business over many years, from the textiles he imported to the silver and gold he exported. It is a personal story of risk, profit, and long-distance relationships. What does this deliberate, careful organization tell us? It speaks of a bureaucratic sophistication we are only beginning to fully appreciate. These were not primitive societies. They were data-driven civilizations, using clay and stylus to build networks of trade that stretched across the known world. Understanding this definition, the very nature of these archives, is the key that unlocks the specific, incredible stories we are about to explore. That first glimpse of a tablet corner emerging from the earth is a moment of pure connection across time. For an archaeologist, it is the start of a painstaking process of revelation. Each of the 30 archives we will explore was recovered through methods that are as meticulous as the record-keeping they uncover. At sites like Tel Marduk, the ancient city of Ebla, or the sacred city of Nippur, teams work layer by layer, following the principles of stratigraphy. This is the science of reading the earth itself, understanding that the deepest layers are the oldest, and that every object has a story told by its position. When a cluster of tablets is found in a specific room, it tells us that room was an office. Tablets found in a courtyard might point to a more public records area. This context is everything. A tablet looted from its site and sold on the antiquities market may still have fascinating text, but it has lost its story. We do not know which building it came from, what other tablets it was stored with, or what year it was written. It is a single puzzle piece with the picture on the box lost forever. The scientifically excavated tablet, however, comes with its entire history intact. The discovery of the Amarna letters in Egypt is a perfect example. Found in their original context, the royal archive of Pharaoh Akhenaten, these clay tablets were not economic ledgers but diplomatic correspondence. They revealed a complex network of international gift exchange between great kings, detailing shipments of gold, silver, lapis lazuli, and even royal marriages. This was the high-level diplomacy that governed the flow of luxury goods, a supply chain of prestige and power. The work does not end with the brush. Once a tablet is exposed, it can be incredibly fragile. Preservationists step in to carefully clean and stabilize the clay, sometimes baking it in special ovens to harden it for the ages. Then the decipherment begins, a task that requires deep knowledge of long-dead languages and number systems. How does the context of a tablet's discovery change its meaning? A shipping manifest found in a merchant's house tells a story of private enterprise. The exact same type of document found in a royal palace becomes a record of state-sponsored trade or taxation. This foundational understanding of how these records come to light, from their first glimpse in the soil to their translation in a lab, gives us the critical eye we need. It reminds us that we are not just reading words on clay, we are reconstructing the very rooms and the systems where those words were written. A single clay tablet is a statement of fact. It tells us that on a certain day, a specific amount of barley was delivered, but it is the connections between thousands of these tablets that reveal the story. Reconstructing an ancient supply chain is a form of high-stakes detective work, where each fragmentary clue must be linked to build a dynamic picture of a living economy. This methodology relies on several key disciplines working in concert. Paleography, the detailed study of ancient handwriting, allows experts to date tablets and identify the work of different scribble schools. A subtle change in the way a wedge is made can pinpoint a document to within a few decades, anchoring it in time. Then there is prosopography, a fascinating technique that involves building profiles of individuals by linking their names across many documents. As historian Dr. Karen Radner has demonstrated, by following a specific merchant's name through a series of tablets, we can map his business partnerships, track his trade routes, and even glimpse his rising or falling fortunes. This transforms a list of names into a network of people. Quantitative analysis turns numbers into narratives. By tallying the volumes and frequencies of commodity shipments mentioned across an archive, patterns emerge. A sudden spike in tin imports might correlate with a known period of warfare and weapons production. A drop in textile shipments could indicate a drought affecting the sheep herds. But the numbers only tell part of the story. Textual analysis deciphers the contractual language, the promises, and the obligations. It reveals the intricate logistics, from the interest rates on silver loans that financed voyages to the clauses protecting a merchant if his caravan was robbed. This written word is often given physical authority by a cylinder seal impression, a unique signature rolled into the clay that authenticates the document and tracks ownership through every hand it passes. The most powerful insights come from marrying the text with the material world. A tablet might list shipments of a specific type of fine pottery. When archaeologists find that exact pottery in a distant city, the textual record and the physical artifact lock together, confirming the trade route. A brilliant example is the reconstruction of the copper trade from Cyprus to the Near East. Cuneiform tablets from places like Mare reference large shipments of copper from Alashia, a kingdom now identified as Cyprus. Metallurgical analysis of copper ingots found in shipwrecks and at port cities can then be matched to the unique chemical signature of Cypriot copper ores. The paper trail and the scientific data become one and the same, painting a vivid picture of ships laden with raw metals sailing across the Mediterranean. Does this painstaking process of linking disparate data points feel familiar? It should. The core principles of these ancient methodologies, tracking entities, mapping relationships, and analyzing flow patterns, are the direct ancestors of the network analysis and big data analytics that power our modern global economy. We are simply using silicon instead of clay. Buried within the ruins of a royal palace in Syria, the archive of Ebla offers a masterclass in ancient economic power. Discovered by the Italian archaeologist Paolo Mattii, this collection of over 20,000 clay tablets opens a direct window into the 24th century before the Common Era. These are not epic tales, but the day-to-day paperwork of a kingdom, meticulously recording tributes paid by neighboring towns, rations distributed to its workers, and the complex flow of goods that fueled its wealth. Ebla did not just participate in trade, it acted as a central hub, a crucial link between the advanced civilizations of Mesopotamia and the raw materials of the Mediterranean world. The tablets detail a bustling economy centered on two key commodities, textiles and metals. Vast quantities of wool were brought in, processed in palace workshops, and woven into fine fabrics that were then traded for silver, gold, and the deep blue lapis lazuli that was so prized by kings. The organization of the archive itself speaks to a highly centralized administration. Tablets were filed by the year of the king's reign and by the specific official responsible, creating a clear chain of accountability. The language used is a fascinating hybrid, the local Eblate tongue written with the borrowed, prestigious script of Sumer, a clear sign of Ebla's place in a wider cultural and commercial world. One specific tablet makes this global connection breathtakingly real. It is a simple record, a receipt for a shipment of lapis lazuli. But this brilliant blue stone could only come from a single source, mines located thousands of miles away in the mountains of modern-day Afghanistan. To travel from those remote peaks to the heart of Ebla, the stone had to pass through countless hands, crossing deserts and rivers on a supply chain of astonishing length and resilience. How did this centralized control over information translate into real power? By knowing exactly what came in and what went out, the royal palace could plan, allocate resources, and project its influence with a precision that lesser kingdoms could not match. The archive was the kingdom's brain, and every tablet was a vital synapse. The sheer scale of the Ebla archive speaks to the power of kings, but what about the ambitions of ordinary individuals? 1,000 kilometers to the north and 1,000 years later, an entirely different kind of economy was flourishing, one driven not by royal decree but by profit. Buried in the private homes of a merchant colony in central Anatolia, the archives of Kultep-Kanish tell that story. Here, in the 19th century before the Common Era, Assyrian merchants from the city of Ashur established a bustling trading post, a Karam, and their meticulous records reveal a capitalist network of stunning sophistication. These were not palace scribes recording state taxes. These were businessmen writing to their partners and families, their clay tablets filled with the gritty details of profit, loss, and risk. Assyriologist Mogens Troll Larsen describes this system as a prototype of the modern multinational corporation, built on credit, trust, and long-distance communication. The entire enterprise revolved around two key commodities. From the east, from Ashur, they brought finely woven textiles and, most critically, tin. From Anatolia, they exported silver and gold. The tin was the lifeblood of the age, an essential component for making bronze, and its supply chain was a marvel of logistics. The tablets trace its journey from distant, unnamed mines in Central Asia, likely in modern Afghanistan, all the way to the workshops of Anatolia. This journey was not managed by a king or an empire. It was handled by family firms, partnerships that lasted for generations, with sons inheriting their father's business connections and their carefully maintained clay tablet archives. Primary vehicle for this trade was the donkey caravan. These were not small trains. A single caravan could involve 200 donkeys, each carrying a load of around 65 kilograms of tin or 30 textiles, led by professional transporters across hundreds of miles of rugged terrain. To manage the immense financial risk, these merchants developed a sophisticated system of credit and sealed contracts. A deal would be financed by investors back in Ashur, with loans of silver extended to the traveling merchant. The contracts, pressed into clay and sealed with the unique cylinder seal of each party, spelled out the interest, the responsibilities, and the protections. One tablet, a letter from a merchant to his partner, vividly captures the perils of this life. The writer complains bitterly about a delayed tin shipment, lamenting the financial repercussions. He writes that the local price of tin has plummeted because other caravans arrived first, and he is now facing steep losses. This single complaint, etched in clay, reveals a market sensitive to supply and demand, where timing was everything. How did these networks survive wars and shifting political alliances? the archives show remarkable resilience. When a local Anatolian king raised taxes or a route became dangerous, the merchants adapted. They found new paths, renegotiated terms, or temporarily shifted their product mix. Their private letters are filled with strategic advice and market intelligence, a constant flow of information that was as valuable as the goods they carried. What does this tell us about ancient private commerce? It was not a primitive barter system. It was a complex, adaptable, and resilient web of human relationships, all documented on tablets stored in a merchant's home, proving that the drive for enterprise is one of humanity's most enduring constants. The bustling Assyrian caravans connected entire empires, but the true power of these clay records lies in their ability to capture the economic life of a single, vibrant city. In the Hurrian city of Nuzi, a mid-second millennium before the Common Era archive reveals an economy woven into the very fabric of its society. Here, thousands of tablets from both public buildings and private homes show us a world where law, family, and commerce were inseparable. Unlike the state-focused records of Ebla or the prophet-driven letters from Kanish, the Nuzi archives expose the local roots of a supply chain, documenting everything from land management to the daily work of craft workshops. This was not just about moving goods from one place to another. It was about who owned what, who owed labor to whom, and how social status dictated the flow of resources. Scholars like David I. Owen have pieced together a society with remarkably complex laws governing inheritance and property, rules that directly shaped how grain, wool, and metal moved through the community. A person could not simply sell a family estate. To get around this, they used clever legal fictions, like adoption contracts where a wealthy citizen would legally adopt a man in exchange for his property rights. These were not just family matters, they were sophisticated economic transactions that redirected wealth and resources, all meticulously recorded on clay. The tablets from Nuzi provide an intimate look inside the workshops that formed the end of many supply chains. We can read detailed allocations of raw materials, where a palace official distributes a specific weight of raw wool to a group of weavers, with a contract stipulating the exact number and quality of finished textiles they must return. The same system applied to metalworkers who received measured amounts of copper or tin and were accountable for the tools or weapons they produced. This was a managed economy, tracking inputs and outputs with precision. These records also highlight the crucial, often overlooked economic role of women. Many of the weavers named in these textile allocations were women, and tablets show women owning property, engaging in trade, and managing their own household's production. The supply chain did not stop at the city walls. Other tablets detail the exchange of goods between the urban center of Nuzi and its surrounding rural areas. Villages would send in agricultural products like grain and livestock, and in return receive manufactured goods like tools or cloth from the city's workshops. This created a constant, documented cycle of resource movement. One specific contract brings this system to life. It is a simple yet powerful document detailing the delivery of a specified amount of wool to a textile workshop. The tablet lists the names of the women who received the wool, the quantity given to each, and the deadline for returning the finished cloth. It is a single snapshot of a massive operation, a cog in the machine that clothed the entire city. How do legal and social structures, as seen in Nuzi, influence the actual flow of goods within a supply chain? They act as the invisible channels that direct the economic river. Inheritance laws determined who controlled farmland, affecting the grain supply. Labor obligations meant that certain families had to provide workers, affecting craft production. The Nuzi archives remind us that an economy is never just a list of commodities. It is a living, breathing system built on human relationships, legal agreements, and social roles, all etched into clay for us to decipher thousands of years later. A king's plea for gold echoes across the desert, not carved in hieroglyphs on a temple wall, but pressed into a humble clay tablet in the language of a foreign empire. The Amarna letters, discovered at the short-lived capital of the pharaoh Akhenaten, shatter our image of isolated ancient kingdoms. Here, in diplomatic correspondence between Egypt and the other great powers of the late Bronze Age, we see the highest-level supply chain in action, one where politics and economics were inseparably fused. This was not trade in the Assyrian merchant's sense. It was a carefully choreographed dance of gift exchange, where the flow of luxury goods was the physical manifestation of power and alliance. As Egyptologist William L. Moran described, these letters are filled with the language of brotherhood and diplomacy, yet their subtext is a constant negotiation over resources. A king from Babylon complains that the gold sent by Egypt is not as plentiful as it was in his father's day, a clear pressure tactic wrapped in the guise of familial disappointment. Another, from the kingdom of Mitanni, explicitly requests solid gold statues in exchange for shipments of prized horses. These were not simple purchases. The gift of gold affirmed Egypt's wealth and the recipient's status, binding them in a relationship of mutual obligation. The logistics behind these diplomatic shipments were themselves a feat of statecraft. Special envoys and messengers, acting as combination ambassadors and freight managers, traveled with armed escorts across vast distances. Ships laden with ebony, ivory, and jars of precious incense moved between royal courts, their cargoes protected by the weight of the king's seal. The very language used, Akkadian, became the international tongue of business and diplomacy, a linguistic common ground that allowed a pharaoh in Egypt and a king in Mesopotamia to negotiate the precise terms of a lapis lazuli shipment. This system raises a profound question about the nature of ancient trade itself. To what extent was the movement of essential and luxury goods driven by political calculation rather than pure market forces? In the world of the Amarna letters, a shipment of gold was never just gold. It was a signal, a threat, or a promise, ensuring that the lifeblood of prestige and power continued to flow along channels carved by diplomacy. Hattus's walls enclosed the beating heart of an empire. High in the Anatolian plateau, the Hittite capital safeguarded a different kind of treasure, the state archives. Within these royal storerooms, thousands of clay tablets in Hittite, Akkadian, and other languages documented the relentless engine of imperial power. This was not a network of free merchants, but a command economy of breathtaking scale, designed for one primary purpose: to fuel the state and its army. Hittitologists like Trevor Bryce pieced together a world where every shipment of grain, every ingot of metal, and every herd of livestock was tracked with imperial precision. The tablets are filled with inventories, instructions to provincial governors, and reports from military outposts, all detailing the systematic flow of resources from the farthest corners of Anatolia and Syria directly to the capital. This was the logistics of empire written in clay. The entire system relied on a network of provincial centers, each responsible for collecting taxes in the form of goods and sending them to central storage facilities in Hattusa. A single tablet might record the annual tribute expected from a conquered city, listing exact amounts of barley, wine, and horses. These were not requests. They were binding obligations enforced by treaty and military might. The treaties themselves were masterpieces of economic control, securing a predictable flow of resources from vassal states in exchange for protection, or more accurately, the threat of retribution. Once these goods arrived in the capital, they were meticulously managed. Vast state-run granaries and warehouses acted as the empire's battery, storing surplus for lean years and for military campaigns. The records show careful accounting of what was in storage, what was distributed as rations to workers and soldiers, and what was allocated to the great temples. The temples were not just religious sites, they were key nodes in this redistribution network, converting the state's collected wealth into offerings and sustaining a large class of priests and artisans. This centralized control was most critical for the army. Tablets detail the logistics of provisioning troops on the march, specifying the exact rations of bread and beer each soldier was to receive and the wagons needed to carry their supplies. The state's ability to project power across vast distances depended entirely on this carefully managed supply chain. How did this Hittite system of centralized control contribute to both imperial stability and its eventual collapse? For centuries, it provided the Hittites with unparalleled strength, allowing them to field large, well-supplied armies and withstand droughts by releasing grain from their reserves. Yet this very rigidity contained the seeds of weakness. When climate shifts caused widespread crop failure, when rebellious vassals stopped sending their shipments, or when the central authority in Hattusa weakened, the entire intricate system could falter. The empire's lifeblood was this controlled flow of goods, and when the flow was interrupted, the heart of the empire eventually stopped beating. The salty air of Ugarit's harbor carried the sounds of a dozen languages. This was not a city ruled by a single empire, but a vibrant, cosmopolitan port where merchants from the Aegean, Egypt, and Mesopotamia all converged. Its archives, written in Ugaritic, Akkadian, and even Cypro-Minoan, reflect this incredible diversity, painting a portrait of a city that thrived as a masterful intermediary. Archaeologists like Marguerite Yon uncovered a society whose economic lifeblood was the flow of goods across the sea. The tablets from royal palaces, temples, and private homes are not isolated records, but interconnected pieces of a single puzzle, detailing every facet of a sophisticated maritime supply chain. We can read a contract for a shipment of fine olive oil, a letter from a ship's captain reporting a safe voyage, and a royal account of tariffs collected on imported copper, all relating to the same web of commerce. This was a city built on logistics. The records reveal a deep understanding of standardized weights and measures, a common language of value that allowed a merchant from Cyprus to confidently trade with a merchant from Hattusa without fear of being cheated. They even developed early forms of risk management, with contracts that functioned like primitive insurance agreements, spreading the financial loss if a ship and its cargo were lost to a storm. One remarkable tablet details the outright sale of a ship, along with its entire cargo of precious timber, a transaction that required trust, liquid capital, and a clear legal framework to enforce. What made Ugarit so uniquely successful was its ability to blend these influences, creating a hybrid economic culture that was both flexible and resilient. Its scribes could switch between languages and accounting systems as easily as its merchants switched between trading partners, yet this very interconnectedness became its greatest vulnerability. When the storm clouds of the late Bronze Age collapse gathered, the intricate trade networks that were Ugarit's reason for being began to fray and then snap. The tablets from its final years tell a story of declining shipments, cancelled orders, and growing silence from once reliable partners. How does a society built on global connection survive when the world it connects suddenly falls apart? The Ugarit archives show us the brilliant complexity of international trade, and then offer a silent, clay testimony to its terrifying fragility. The scent of cedar and olive oil would have filled the halls of the palace at Pylos. On the eve of its destruction, as a fire swept through the complex, something remarkable happened. The heat baked thousands of clay tablets, preserving them for over 3,000 years. These were the palace archives, written not in cuneiform but in a script called Linear B, and they offer our clearest window into the lost world of Mycenaean Greece. Unlike the merchant letters of Canish, these tablets reveal an economy of absolute central control, a redistributive system where the palace was the heart that pumped resources through the entire body of the kingdom. Classicist John Chadwick described this as a command economy where the palace did not just regulate trade, it was the trade. Every thread of the economic fabric passed through its hands. The tablets are overwhelmingly lists, meticulous inventories of what came in and what went out. They track the flow of textiles, vast quantities of perfumed oil, bronze, and the agricultural surplus that fed everyone from the king to the slaves. To understand this system is to reconstruct a supply chain managed with bureaucratic precision. Take the production of linen. The palace collected raw flax as a form of tax from outlying villages. This flax was then allocated, as recorded on specific tablets, to workshops of dependent women weavers who are named and given rations for their labor. The finished cloth was then stored in the palace's vast magazines, ready to be distributed as gifts, traded, or used to clothe the palace's own workers and military. The same process applied to wool, from the royal flocks to the spinners and weavers, and finally to the storerooms. The organization of labor was incredibly specialized. The tablets list groups of workers by their craft: smiths, chariot makers, perfumers, each dependent on the palace for their raw materials and their food rations. They even used a system of ideograms, small pictorial symbols, to quickly denote commodities, a Bronze Age version of modern icons for fast data entry. This control extended to long-distance trade, though it was strictly a palace monopoly. Tablets mention ivory, likely from Syria or Egypt, and gold, suggesting the palace directed ships to acquire these luxuries. One telling example is a tablet that records an allocation of bronze to a group of smiths. It is not a bill of sale, it is an instruction detailing the exact weight of metal given to them and implying the specific weapons or tools they were expected to produce in return. This single record is a snapshot of the entire military supply chain, from raw material to finished product, all orchestrated by the palace bureaucracy. How did this palatial economy of Pylos compare to the more flexible, merchant-driven systems of the Near East in terms of efficiency and resilience? For a time, it was incredibly efficient, marshalling the entire kingdom's resources toward state goals, whether building fortifications or equipping an army. But this very rigidity may have been its greatest weakness. When the palace itself fell, the entire economic system it commanded collapsed with it, leaving no independent networks to carry on. The Pylos archives show us the immense power of centralization and its profound vulnerability. The Palace of Mari stood as a grand sentinel on the banks of the Euphrates, its archives a river of data flowing through the heart of the old Babylonian world. Within its storerooms, thousands of clay tablets preserved the pulse of a city-state whose power was derived not from vast conquest, but from its impeccable location. Situated between the great powers of Mesopotamia and the resource-rich lands of Syria and Anatolia, Mari was the ultimate intermediary, and its records, studied by historians like Jean-Marie Durand, are a masterclass in the logistics of connection. These are not dry inventories, but vibrant letters, urgent economic reports, and binding treaties that map the lifeblood of Bronze Age commerce. They detail the precise movement of tin for bronze, textiles for trade, and precious timber for construction, all flowing along the river and the desert routes that converged at Mari's gates. The city's entire economy was built on facilitating this flow, and its meticulous record-keeping was the tool that made it possible. At the center of this activity was the Tamkaram, a figure often translated as merchant, but who acted as a state agent, a combination of diplomat, quartermaster, and business manager. The tablets show the Tamkaram organizing caravans, securing loans of silver to finance voyages, and negotiating treaties that guaranteed safe passage for goods. They were responsible for provisioning these trading expeditions, allocating precise rations of grain and donkeys for the journey, and managing the warehouses where incoming commodities were stored and accounted for. This was a supply chain managed with military precision because the wealth and security of the state depended on it. The Euphrates River itself was a central artery, and the archives are filled with references to the boatmen and the fleets of barges that carried heavy materials like timber, which would have been nearly impossible to transport in large quantities over land. A single administrative note might record the arrival of 5 barges laden with cedar logs from upstream, their cargo immediately measured and entered into the palace ledgers. This system was also built for resilience. The letters reveal a constant state of crisis management, showcasing how Mari adapted to the shocks that threatened ancient trade. During a drought, officials would correspond about redirecting grain shipments to starving towns. When conflict broke out with a neighboring kingdom, reports detail the rerouting of caravans to avoid contested territories. One vivid example is a letter from an official reporting on the anxious anticipation and then the relief at the arrival of a tin shipment from the east. This was not just a delivery, it was a strategic event. Tin was the essential ingredient for bronze, and any interruption in its supply could weaken a kingdom's military capacity. The letter captures the very moment the supply chain, stretched over thousands of miles, successfully delivered its vital cargo. How did Mari's strategic location directly shape its economic strategies and the very nature of its archives? It forced the city to become a master of information. To profit from its position as a middleman, it had to document everything: the prices in different markets, the political stability of its partners, the reliability of caravan leaders. Its archives were its strategic advantage, a database of the known world that allowed it to thrive at the crossroads of empires. This underscores a timeless truth that geography dictates not only the routes of trade, but also the necessity of the records that keep it all flowing. The bustling markets of Larsa were a symphony of commerce, their rhythms captured not in song but in the crisp lines of clay. In this southern Mesopotamian city, during the era known as the Larsa period, a different economic engine was humming, one driven less by royal command and more by the ambition of private families. The commercial archives unearthed here reveal a world of sophisticated business, where family firms operated with a financial acumen that feels strikingly modern. These are not the records of a palace distributing rations, but the ledgers of entrepreneurs. They detail loans extended with interest, complex partnerships formed to share risk and reward, and countless contracts for the exchange of barley, dates, wool, and copper. Economists like Morris Silver point to these tablets as clear evidence of a vibrant market economy, where prices were not set by the state but by the dynamics of supply and demand. The entire system was lubricated by the use of silver as a common medium of exchange, a primitive form of money that allowed for complex calculations of value across different goods. This was more than barter, it was a monetized economy in its earliest stages. To reconstruct the supply chain from these records is to follow a bushel of barley from a rural farm to a foreign port. A tablet might record a loan of seed silver to a farmer, enabling him to plant his crop. After the harvest, he would repay the loan with interest from his yield, and that barley would then be sold to a merchant. That merchant, perhaps financed by another silver loan from a wealthy investor, would load the grain onto a barge. The canals of Mesopotamia were the highways of their day, and these records are filled with references to boat transport, moving bulk goods with an efficiency that overland routes could never match. The barley would travel to urban centers like Larsa itself, feeding the city's population, or be shipped further down the Gulf in a daring trading expedition. We have a specific contract that brings this entire chain to life. It is a loan of a significant amount of silver to a merchant, explicitly for financing a voyage to the distant land of Dilmun, modern-day Bahrain. The contract stipulates the terms of repayment, often in copper or other precious goods upon the ship's safe return. This single document encapsulates the entire spirit of Larsa: credit-enabling commerce, risk being managed through legal agreement, and private initiative forging connections across the sea. What financial innovations from Larsa's bustling markets can we see in our world today? The very concepts of interest-bearing loans, joint partnerships, and standardized contracts that reduced transaction costs were all being refined in these clay records. They laid the foundational stones for the banking and trade systems that would eventually circle the globe, proving that the language of business is one of humanity's oldest and most enduring inventions. A river port's fortune is written in the timber that flows downstream. At the Syrian city of Emar, perched on a great bend of the Euphrates, the clay tablet archives capture the final, vibrant century of the Late Bronze Age. These records, excavated from both temples and private houses, reveal a city living in two worlds. On one hand, Emar was a vassal within the vast Hittite Empire, its economy subject to imperial demands. On the other, it was a deeply Syrian city with its own traditions, its own gods, and its own bustling commercial life. Scholar Daniel E. Fleming describes this as a fascinating interplay, where Hittite imperial control met resilient local Syrian traditions, creating a unique and layered economy. The tablets themselves reflect this duality. There are administrative lists detailing goods owed to the Hittite crown, legal texts resolving disputes between local merchants, and letters from priests managing temple estates. Together, they form a mosaic of a borderland economy, mapping the flow of wine, olive oil, timber, and metals that moved between Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and the Levant. Emar's lifeblood was its position as a river port. The Euphrates was its highway, and the archives are filled with references to the boats and shipbuilders who made commerce possible. One specific contract, pressed into clay, details the delivery of a large quantity of timber to a local shipbuilder. This was not just a simple sale. It was a critical link in the supply chain, transforming raw materials from upstream forests into the vessels that would carry those very materials and other goods even further downriver. The records also document a more sobering commodity, the trade in slaves and horses. These were high-value, mobile assets, and their movement tells us about the darker currents of this interconnected world, where human lives were part of the economic calculus. But this position at the crossroads of empires was a double-edged sword. The same networks that brought wealth also carried vulnerability. As the era drew to a close, the tablets begin to hint at the disruptions caused by the mysterious sea peoples and the general collapse of the international system. Shipments became less reliable, and the meticulous record-keeping began to falter. How did Emar's existence in this borderland shape its economic resilience and the very way it kept its records? The archives suggest a culture of meticulous documentation, perhaps born from the need to navigate multiple layers of authority. A local merchant had to satisfy both his Hittite overlord and his traditional community, and the clay tablet was his proof, his contract, and his defense. This was an economy that had learned to adapt, to blend imperial demands with local enterprise. Yet, when the great empires themselves began to crumble, that very adaptability may not have been enough. The Emar archives offer a poignant glimpse into a world of connected prosperity, and then a silent testimony to its unraveling. The kingdom of Alalakh stood at a crossroads, its fortunes tied to the whims of greater empires. In the Orontes Valley, archives spanning centuries tell a story of a regional economy tightly woven into the fabric of larger powers. Excavated by Sir Leonard Woolley, these tablets in Akkadian and local languages are the administrative pulse of a vassal state. They are filled with treaties that bound Alalakh to kingdoms like Yamhad and later Mitanni, inventories of goods moving in and out of its storerooms, and letters negotiating the terms of its existence. This was not a fully independent economy, but a managed one, its supply chains shaped by its political subordination. The palace at Alalakh was the central processor, and its records show a meticulous system of allocation. Tablets detail precise quantities of raw wool or metal ingots being issued to specific workshops of craftsmen. These artisans, often named in the records, were then obligated to return a set amount of finished cloth or bronze tools. This was a controlled production line, feeding the local need for goods and generating a surplus for the overlord. The system of taxation was equally direct. Taxes were collected in kind, not in silver. A farmer's obligation to the palace was paid in bushels of grain, a herder's in sheep and wool. This stream of raw materials flowed into the palace warehouses, becoming the fuel for the entire economic engine. Some tablets even record the mobilization of forced labor, corvée workers drafted to build fortifications or work the land, their efforts documented as just another resource to be managed. Yet within these constraints, Alalakh thrived as a trade intermediary. Its records note active commerce with coastal cities like Ugarit, exporting its textiles and agricultural products in exchange for luxury goods and metals. Every transaction was authenticated with the press of a cylinder seal, a unique signature that guaranteed the agreement and tracked the movement of goods through every hand. One telling text encapsulates this entire relationship of dependency. It is a shipment manifest listing carefully recorded quantities of silver and finely woven garments being sent as tribute to the Mitannian court. This was not a profit-driven trade. It was a political obligation, a payment that secured Alalakh's place within the imperial hierarchy. The silver and garments represented wealth extracted from the local economy and sent upstream to the center of power. How did vassalage relationships shape the economic autonomy and supply chains of smaller states like Alalakh? They created a form of economic dependency, where local production and trade were ultimately directed toward serving a distant overlord. The kingdom could innovate and trade, but its most valuable resources were systematically funneled away, a dynamic of ancient power that resonates through the clay. The Empire of Ur was a machine of breathtaking precision. In the 21st century before the Common Era, the third dynasty of Ur forged a state so centralized that its economic grip reached into every granary, every sheepfold, and every weaving workshop from the Persian Gulf to the heart of Mesopotamia. The sheer volume of its administrative archives, unearthed at cities like Ur, Nippur, and Girsu, is staggering. Tens of thousands of clay tablets survive, and they do not record epic poetry or royal decrees. They are the operational logs of a command economy operating on an unprecedented scale. These documents track rations for thousands of laborers, assign specific work crews to irrigation canals, and trace the movement of commodities from one state warehouse to another with relentless detail. Sumerologist Peter Steinkeller describes this as the world's first thoroughly documented planned economy, a system designed to leave nothing to chance. At the heart of this system was a bureaucracy of almost unimaginable efficiency. It ran on a standardized calendar and a strict accounting year, allowing officials in the capital to compare the output of distant provinces directly. The key figure in this local administration was the Ngar, a term often translated as accountant or registrar. This official was the human node in the network, responsible for measuring the harvest, counting the livestock, and issuing the clay tablets that reported it all back to the central authority. His records were the raw data that allowed the state to plan, to allocate, and to control. To reconstruct a supply chain from these archives is to see the entire economic cycle of the empire. It begins with the state distributing seed barley from its storehouses to farmers at the start of the growing season. After the harvest, that same barley, now multiplied, flows back into the state's granaries as tax. From there, it is meticulously measured out as monthly rations to feed the enormous workforce that built and maintained the empire. We have a specific tablet that makes this abstract system vividly real. It is a simple administrative record from the city of Gersu, detailing the monthly issue of barley to a group of laborers who are constructing the Great Ziggurat. Each worker is allotted a precise volume of grain, their survival and their labor power directly fueled by the state's centralized collection and redistribution system. This same meticulous tracking applied to wool, with tablets recording the shearing of state-owned flocks, the allocation of raw wool to weaving workshops, and the subsequent return of finished textiles to the storerooms. Even the humble fish harvested from the empire's rivers and canals was counted, processed in state-run drying facilities, and distributed as part of the standard ration. This control did not mean complete isolation. The archives also provide evidence of long-distance trade, but it was a trade managed by the state. Tablets mention the arrival of luxury goods like lapis lazuli and carnelian from distant lands like Meluha, likely the Indus Valley. These items did not enter a free market. They were channeled directly into the palace workshops to be turned into elite jewelry, reinforcing the prestige and power of the ruling class. What were the inherent strengths and weaknesses of such a tightly controlled economic system? For a time, it was a phenomenal strength. It allowed for the mobilization of labor on a massive scale for monumental projects like ziggurats and irrigation systems. It provided a safety net, storing surplus grain to see the population through lean years and preventing local famines. But this very rigidity was also its greatest vulnerability. The system had little flexibility, no room for the innovation or adaptation that comes from decentralized private enterprise. When the central authority was strong, the machine hummed. But when a crisis hit, whether a climatic shift that reduced harvests or an invasion that disrupted the flow of goods, the entire intricate top-down structure was at risk of catastrophic failure. The Roman III archives stand as a monumental testament to the power of early state-level economic planning, a blueprint for control written in clay. Back in the city of Ashur itself, the administrative heart of the entire trade network kept its own meticulous records. These archives, found in the homes of the city's most powerful families, offer the home office perspective on the daring ventures we saw in Kanish. While the Anatolian tablets are the field reports from the frontier, the Ashur records are the corporate headquarters, detailing the financing, regulation, and strategic oversight that made the entire system possible. Assyriologists like Klaus R. Wienhoff describe a city utterly dedicated to commerce, its economic lifeblood flowing along two parallel streams, the import of tin and the export of textiles, all governed by a sophisticated institutional framework. The city itself acted as a central clearinghouse. Tin, arriving from distant mines to the east, was taxed and standardized. Mesopotamian textiles produced in vast quantities were inspected for quality and bundled for transport. The Ashur tablets reveal a supply chain that began with raw materials from hundreds of miles away converging on this single urban hub, where they were combined into profitable export packages destined for Anatolia. This system was not a free-for-all. The city's authorities, acting through a body known as the City Assembly, enforced strict regulations. They guaranteed the quality of textiles with official seals, preventing inferior goods from damaging the reputation of all Assyrian merchants abroad. They also managed the logistics of the caravan departures, ensuring that the great donkey trains were properly provisioned and departed on a fixed schedule. A key mechanism was the Nishatu tax, a duty levied on the goods as they left the city gates. This tax was not a burden, but a vital service. It helped fund the infrastructure and protection that made the trade routes viable, a primitive form of trade association dues that benefited the entire merchant community. The records from family homes show that this was very much a family business. While men traveled with the caravans, women often managed the commercial interests back in Ashur. Tablets show women like Lamasi, the wife of the merchant Pusa Ashur, actively involved in financing trade missions, managing complex household finances, and corresponding with her husband about market conditions. These were not passive bystanders, they were integral partners in an enterprise that spanned continents. Disputes were inevitable, and the legal tablets from Ashur provide a fascinating look at contract law in action. One case details a lawsuit between two brothers over the division of profits from a particularly successful caravan. The tablet meticulously records the initial investment, the expenses incurred, and the final revenue, with the city assembly ultimately ruling on how the silver should be fairly split. This single document is a microcosm of the entire system, built on enforceable agreements and shared understanding. How did this strong institutional framework in Ashur actually enable such risky long-distance trade? It created a foundation of trust and predictability. A merchant in Kanesh could be confident that the textiles arriving from the capital were of a guaranteed quality. An investor in Ashur knew that the contracts he financed were backed by the authority of the city assembly. This reduced the inherent uncertainties of a months-long journey, allowing capital to flow and ventures to be launched with a degree of security. The Ashur archives complete the picture, showing us that the daring individualism of the merchant on the road was only possible because of the stable, regulated, and deeply collaborative economy he left behind. The quiet hum of a scribble school in Nippur was a sound of civilization itself being preserved. Here, in one of Mesopotamia's most sacred cities, the great temple complexes were not just houses of worship but sprawling economic engines. The archives of Nippur offer a unique perspective, one filtered through the lens of education and devotion. Unlike the royal warehouses of Ur or the merchant houses of Ashur, these tablets were often the work of student scribes, their hands carefully copying out centuries-old administrative documents as part of their training. Scholars like Steve Tinney reveal that this pedagogical practice was a form of knowledge preservation, ensuring that each new generation understood not only literature and god lists, but also the intricate logistics of running a temple's vast economic empire. At the center of this divine economy was the Sangha priest, a figure who was far more than a spiritual leader. He was the chief executive officer of a massive institution, responsible for managing the temple's agricultural lands, its herds of livestock, and its workshops. The economic texts mixed in with the literary and school tablets show us his world. They detail the income from land leases to local farmers who paid their rent in a share of the barley harvest. They record the incoming offerings from the faithful, everything from a single lamb to vast quantities of grain and silver, all dedicated to the city's patron god, Enlil. This constant flow of resources had to be managed with precision. because the temple was responsible for feeding its army of workers, from bakers and brewers to musicians and artisans. This system reconstructs a supply chain dedicated to both ritual and daily sustenance. A single practice tablet, clumsily copied by a student, might list the delivery of specific quantities of dates and barley to the temple brewery. This was not a theoretical exercise. It was a lesson in the real-world logistics that turned agricultural surplus into beer, a staple beverage that was both a daily ration for workers and a key offering in religious ceremonies. The same archives provide evidence of long-distance trade for the divine, noting the acquisition of exotic materials like gold, lapis lazuli, and rare woods, all destined for the creation and adornment of cult statues. The very objects of worship were thus the endpoints of supply chains that stretched across continents. How did the religious institutions of ancient Mesopotamia so completely integrate economic activities into their spiritual functions? The Nippur archives provide the answer. There was no separation. Managing the god's estate efficiently was itself an act of devotion. A well-supplied temple ensured that the rituals were performed correctly, pleasing the gods and maintaining the cosmic order. The economy of the earthly realm was a direct reflection of, and a contribution to, the economy of the divine. This entanglement of faith and finance, all practiced by scribble students on clay, reveals a civilization where the sacred and the logistical were two sides of the very same tablet. A king's command travels along a network of clay and trust. At the city of Shubat in Lil, modern Tel Leilan, the archives of Shamshi-Adad I's northern Mesopotamian kingdom reveal a state in perpetual motion. These are not the records of merchants or temple priests, but the operational heartbeat of a militarized power. Letters and administrative reports, studied by archaeologists like Harvey Weiss, detail the relentless movement of troops, grain, and information across a landscape held together by royal will. Every tablet is a piece of a grand strategy, documenting a supply chain designed for one overwhelming purpose: to fuel expansion and defense. The entire economy was bent toward this goal. We can trace the flow of grain from agricultural districts directly to the capital, where it was stored in vast state granaries to feed the army on campaign. Other records detail the urgent procurement of copper and tin, the raw materials for the bronze weapons that gave the kingdom its edge. Even the labor force was managed as a strategic resource, with tablets recording the deployment of workers to build fortifications and maintain the roads that allowed the army to move swiftly. Coordination across this realm depended on a constant relay of messengers. These men were the human infrastructure of the state, carrying clay tablets with orders to collect barley, reports on troop dispositions, and warnings of potential shortages. The archives themselves show evidence of regional storage centers, strategically placed depots that allowed the kingdom to project power without overextending its supply lines from the capital. One stark letter cuts to the core of this system. It is a royal command ordering provincial officials to immediately collect and deliver a specified quantity of barley for army provisions. The tone is urgent and uncompromising, a clear directive that leaves no room for delay. This single document encapsulates the entire militarized supply chain in action, from the fields of the farmer to the stomach of the soldier. But these records also hold evidence of a more subtle, yet equally powerful, force shaping the kingdom's destiny. Paleoclimate data suggests that Shamshi-Adad's rise coincided with a period of reliable rainfall, allowing for the agricultural surplus that funded his ambitions. His archives meticulously track this bounty. Yet, the same precision in record-keeping may have documented the beginnings of the drought that would later contribute to the region's abandonment. How did the singular priority of warfare dictate the very way this kingdom recorded its existence? the Tel Leilan archives answer with every line of text. They did not track the ebb and flow of market prices or the profits of private families. They measured only the resources necessary to sustain power, creating an economy in the image of an army, where every bushel of grain and every ingot of metal had a designated military purpose. This was an economy built for conquest, and its clay records are its surviving battle plans. Sunlight glinted off the golden statue of Shamash, but the real treasure of Sippar was stored in its administrative offices. The temple archives from this old Babylonian city reveal an institution that was part bank, part landlord, and part manufacturing hub, all dedicated to the sun god. These clay tablets, studied by scholars like Rivka Harris, show the temple's deep entanglement in the daily economy, managing vast estates and orchestrating complex supply chains with the efficiency of a modern corporation. At the heart of this divine enterprise were the Nadatu women, priestesses of Shamash, who held a unique and powerful position. They lived in a cloister called the Gagum, but far from being isolated, they were active and shrewd businesswomen. The tablets record these women receiving substantial dowries from their families, which they then invested with remarkable acumen. They owned fields, lent silver at interest, and financed trading ventures, their seals authenticating contracts that moved goods and capital throughout Babylonia. How did a religious institution accumulate and manage such wealth? The temple's income streams were diverse and carefully documented. It owned extensive tracts of agricultural land which it did not farm itself. Instead, tablets detail long-term leases granted to farmers who paid their rent in a share of the barley harvest. This steady stream of grain flowed into the temple's massive storerooms, where it was used to feed a small army of hired laborers, from bakers and brewers to construction workers maintaining the sacred complex. The temple also acted as a central bank for the community, issuing loans of silver and grain to merchants and farmers alike. These were not acts of charity, but calculated financial instruments that generated interest income for the temple, capital that was then reinvested into its own craft production and trade. One specific tablet makes this production chain tangible. It is a record from the temple's textile workshop, detailing the issuance of a precise weight of raw wool to a group of weavers. The weavers, likely hired laborers or dependents of the temple, were contractually obligated to return a set amount of finished cloth, which would be used for temple garments, traded for other goods, or given as gifts to dignitaries. This single document captures a complete supply chain, from the shearing of the temple's own flocks to the distribution of a valuable finished product. The same meticulous tracking applied to the animals destined for sacrifice, which were sourced from the temple's own herds or purchased from outside suppliers, and the silver used for payments, which entered the temple's coffers as loan repayments or donations. In what ways did temple economies like Sippar's complement or compete with royal and private sectors? They were not separate spheres, but deeply interwoven. The temple's lending activities provided liquidity that fueled private commerce, while its massive purchasing power could influence local markets for wool, grain, and silver. It was a formidable, semi-independent economic force, a divine corporation whose power was etched into every administrative tablet, proving that faith and finance have always been close companions. A merchant in the royal city of Ur unrolls a clay tablet, his eyes scanning a list of incoming copper from a distant island called Dilmun. This single record, one of many from the Ur-Roman III period, is a direct testament to a maritime web that stretched across the ancient world. Dilmun, modern Bahrain, was not merely a stop on a map. It was the central processing hub of the Persian Gulf, a place where the supply chains of Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and the copper-rich lands of Magan, modern Oman, all converged. The evidence for this is etched in clay, both in Mesopotamian archives and in the tantalizing fragments found on the island itself. Archaeologist Harriet Crawford describes Dilmun as the quintessential entrepot, a neutral ground where goods were not just traded but transshipped, sorted, and documented for their final journeys. A ship arriving from Oman would offload its raw copper ingots, which were then recorded by Dilmunite officials before being reloaded onto vessels bound for the Mesopotamian cities. This system of break-bulk logistics required meticulous record-keeping, and it is this very process that allows us to reconstruct the routes today. Mesopotamian tablets are filled with references to Dilmun merchants and their distinctive goods, allowing historians to trace a vivid path. Copper was mined in the mountains of Oman, shipped north to Dilmun, and then sent up the Gulf to ports like Ur, where it was desperately needed for tools and weapons. But copper was not the only commodity. The same tablets speak of ivory, likely from India, pearls from the Gulf's own beds, and carnelian and other semi-precious stones, all passing through Dilmun's harbors. How did they manage the immense complexity of tracking all this cargo? The answer lies in the seals. Merchants and officials used unique stone seals, pressed into clay tags that were attached to bales and containers. These seals acted as ancient bills of lading, identifying the owner, the contents, and the intended destination, ensuring that goods moved smoothly through multiple hands without getting lost. Dilmun was more than a warehouse, it was a thriving society in its own right. The archives hint at its own exports, particularly its famed dates, which were likely traded for the raw materials flowing through its ports. This agricultural surplus supported the population and gave them a valuable commodity to exchange. Furthermore, the success of this maritime network depended on a deep, intimate knowledge of the sea. Dilmunite sailors had to master the treacherous tides and currents of the Persian Gulf, using their understanding of the winds and stars to navigate between the river mouths of Mesopotamia and the distant coasts of the Indus. Their ability to reliably traverse this aquatic desert made them the indispensable link between worlds, what made Dilmun such an enduring and successful intermediary. Its power came from neutrality, expertise, and location. It did not seek to conquer the sources of copper or control the markets of Ur. Instead, it perfected the art of connection, creating a trusted, efficient node where all parties could meet. The Dilmun trade archives, though fragmentary, highlight a profound truth that the sea was not a barrier but the most powerful supply chain of all. A governor's seal pressed into clay carried the authority of a distant king. Deep in the heart of ancient Elam, at the site of Haft-Tapa in modern Iran, administrative archives from the Middle Elamite period open a window into a world of provincial logistics. These tablets, written in the distinct Elamite language and script, document the daily rhythm of a center deeply connected to the capital at Susa and the resource-rich highlands. They reveal a supply chain built on local production and obligatory tribute, mapping the flow of grain, livestock, and crafted goods that sustained a kingdom famed for its cultural and geographical diversity. Iranologist Bayzad Mufidi Nasrabadi describes this as a mixed economy, one that balanced local self-sufficiency with the demands of a centralizing state. The archives meticulously track the contents of the provincial granaries, the size and movement of official herds of sheep and cattle, and the assignment of laborers to specific tasks, from maintaining irrigation canals to working on construction projects. This careful accounting allowed the governor to manage regional resources efficiently, while also fulfilling his obligations to send a portion of that wealth back to Susa. One specific tablet makes this system vividly personal. It is a straightforward administrative record detailing the daily distribution of barley rations to a large group of workers building a new temple or palace complex. Each worker received a measured allotment, their physical labor power directly fueled by the grain collected from the surrounding fields. This single document is a snapshot of the entire economic cycle, from agricultural production to state-sponsored construction. The records also hint at trade beyond the province's borders, noting the acquisition of metals like copper and tin from neighboring regions, and the import of precious timber for official building projects. How did the geographical and cultural diversity of Elam influence its economic integration and record-keeping? The Haftepe archives suggest that this very diversity necessitated meticulous documentation. To bind together the lowlands and the highlands, the different ethnic groups and their varied resources, the Elamite administration relied on the universal language of accounting. Their clay tablets were the threads that wove a complex kingdom into a single, functional economy, offering a precious glimpse into a civilization that mastered the art of regional governance long before the rise of its better-known neighbors. The city of Nabata thrived on the fertile plains of the Koba River, its prosperity etched into clay during the very dawn of urban life. The Tel Beidar archives, emerging from a palace in this third millennium city, capture one of Syria's earliest experiments in organized society. These tablets are not grand royal pronouncements, but the quiet, methodical paperwork of a community learning to manage plenty. They detail agricultural yields, count every sheep and goat, and meticulously record the distribution of commodities, revealing a classic redistributive economy in its formative stages. As excavator Mark Lebo notes, the script itself is a marvel of early administration, a unique logo-syllabic system where signs could represent either a word or a syllable, a tool perfectly designed for bureaucratic efficiency. This was the operating system for a new kind of human settlement, the city. At the heart of this system was the central authority of the palace, which acted as the primary engine for the local supply chain. The tablets reconstruct a clear, managed flow of staples from the surrounding hinterland directly into the city's storerooms. Grain, wool, and olive oil were collected from outlying villages as a form of tax or tribute. The palace then became the great redistributor, allocating these resources back to the population as rations for workers, funding for craft specialists, and provisions for public projects. This cycle created a stable, predictable economy where the city and its countryside were bound together in a mutually dependent relationship. The entire process was authenticated by one of the earliest and most consistent uses of sealing practices. Officials and merchants used their personal stone seals, pressing them into the clay of the tablets and on bulli attached to goods, creating a chain of accountability that tracked ownership and responsibility from the farm to the palace warehouse. The records also reveal the seasonal rhythm of this early urban life. Tablets document the mobilization of labor during the harvest, when extra hands were needed to bring in the barley and process the wool. This was not a slave economy, but likely a form of communal obligation, where citizens contributed their labor to the state as part of their civic duty. In return, they received food and other necessities from the very surpluses they helped to create. One specific tablet makes this abstract system beautifully concrete. It is a summary of the annual income of barley, listing the contributions from numerous surrounding farms. This single document is the culmination of an entire year's agricultural cycle, a final tally of the city's most vital resource. It represents the collective effort of a region, all funneled through the administrative hands of Nabata's scribes. What can the Tel Beidar archives tell us about the origins of urban economic systems? They show us that complexity did not begin with empire. It started right here with the simple, profound need to count the barley, track the sheep, and ensure that a city and all who depended on it could survive and thrive. The sheer scale of the Chog Hazanbil ziggurat demanded a logistical miracle. In the heart of ancient Elam, this massive religious complex rose from the plains, its construction chronicled in a unique archive of clay tablets found within the sacred precinct itself. These are not the records of merchants or kings, but the divine paperwork of a state building a home for its gods. They document an economy entirely dedicated to piety, detailing the staggering flow of materials and labor required to erect a temple city from the ground up. The archaeologist Roman Gershman, who first excavated the site, recognized these tablets as a master blueprint, revealing how the Elamite state mobilized its entire territory for a single, sacred purpose. To read them is to witness the birth of a supply chain forged by faith. The numbers are breathtaking. The archives meticulously track the delivery of millions of mud bricks, each one counted and accounted for as it arrived from brickyards across the region. They list vast quantities of timber, including precious cedar, hauled down from distant mountain forests. The records note the arrival of precious metals and semi-precious stones for the altars and cult statues, their journeys from remote mines to the building site carefully logged. This was not a haphazard effort. It was a state-run project of immense precision, managed by officials who understood that building for the gods required an unbroken chain of supply. The logistics of moving these mountains of material were a core challenge, and the tablets show how the Elamites ingeniously used their landscape. Canals, dug specifically for the project, became liquid highways. Barges laden with stone and timber could move heavy loads with an efficiency that overland carts could never match, bringing the very bones of the ziggurat directly to its feet. This system required a massive and diverse labor force, and the archives name them. We see lists of skilled craftsmen, carpenters from one region, metal workers from another, and stonemasons recruited from a third, all brought together for their specialized knowledge. Their work was synchronized with the rhythm of religious festivals, which acted as economic engines, creating deadlines for the completion of specific stages and driving the pace of delivery for offerings and construction materials alike. A single tablet makes this celestial supply chain tangible. It is a straightforward delivery receipt for a shipment of cedar wood, explicitly noted as coming from the mountains. This simple record connects a specific geographic source, a forested slope far away, to the rising temple walls at Chog Hazanbil. It is a single thread in a vast web that pulled resources from every corner of Elam. Beyond the bricks and timber, the archives also reveal the human logistics of feeding and housing this army of workers. Tablets detail the constant deliveries of grain, fish, and beer to the site, the rations that sustained the thousands of hands shaping the ziggurat. They even document the management of water supplies for the workers and the ritual baths, showing that the state had to manage the entire life cycle of its sacred project, from quarry to kitchen. How did the construction of monumental architecture drive economic integration and supply chain development in ancient states? Chog Hazanbil provides the definitive answer. It forced the kingdom to create integrated systems of transport, standardize measurements, and coordinate specialized labor on an unprecedented scale. The need to serve the gods did not just build a temple, it built an economy, proving that the most powerful supply chains are often those fueled by belief. The ambition of a single king could reshape the landscape in a generation. At Kar-Tukulti-Ninurta, a new capital city rose from the banks of the Tigris at the command of the Assyrian ruler Tukulti-Ninurta I, its creation captured in the frantic, detailed records of its own administration. These tablets are a time capsule of imperial will in action, documenting the furious mobilization of an empire's entire supply chain to build a monument to one man's power in the 13th century before the Common Era. Historian Stefan Zawodzki notes that these archives lay bare the coercive muscle of the Assyrian state, a machinery capable of requisitioning stone, timber, and metals from conquered lands and drafting thousands of hands for labor. This was not a gradual, organic growth. It was a sudden, forced concentration of wealth and effort, all meticulously tracked on clay. The supply chain here was explicitly political. Goods did not flow according to market demand, but as tribute and spoils of war, channeled directly from subjugated regions to the building site. Vassal kings and provincial governors were commanded to send specific materials, their contributions recorded as proof of their loyalty. The archives provide stark evidence of long-distance transport for exotic materials, with cedar logs floated down rivers from the distant mountains and rare stones hauled from quarries hundreds of miles away. One tablet makes this system chillingly concrete, a record of a shipment of gold sent from Babylonia immediately following a successful military campaign. This was not trade, it was extraction, the physical transfer of wealth from a defeated enemy to glorify the victor. The human cost was inscribed just as clearly. The same tablets that list building materials also detail the organization of a massive labor force, one largely composed of deportees. Entire populations, uprooted from their homelands after conquest, were put to work on the colossal building project. Their rations of barley and oil were carefully accounted for, a minimal fuel to power the construction of a city that was not their own. This practice served a dual purpose. It provided the muscle for the king's ambition while simultaneously breaking the spirit and identity of conquered peoples. What were the true economic costs of such a monumental endeavor? While the new city stood as a powerful symbol of royal authority, the archives hint at the immense strain it placed on the empire. Diverting such vast quantities of resources and labor from food production and other essential activities was a tremendous risk. The very supply chains that built the capital could weaken the provinces that fed it, creating vulnerabilities that might only become apparent years later. The Kar-Tukulti-Ninurta archives ultimately reveal a profound truth, that the most ambitious supply chains in the ancient world were often those built not for sustenance or commerce, but for the raw expression of power. The wind sweeps across the Syrian steppe, a vast and unforgiving landscape where survival was a calculated gamble. At Tel Sabai-Abiad, a fortified estate stood as a solitary bastion of order, its clay tablets preserving the quiet drama of a rural supply chain operating on the very edge of the known world. These records from the late Bronze Age show us an economy built not on grand palaces, but on the steady rhythm of the seasons, managed first by the Mitannian kingdom and later by the expanding Middle Assyrian state. Excavator Peter Ackermans describes how these tablets reveal a constant, sophisticated strategy for managing risk in a marginal environment. The estate did not rely on a single crop or hope for the best. Its managers practiced diversification, growing different types of grain and maintaining large herds of sheep and goats, ensuring that if one source failed, another could sustain the community. This was resilience written in clay. The entire operation was centered on the Danu, a fortified farm that acted as a self-contained economic unit. It was a node in a larger network, producing its own food and wool while also feeding resources back into the imperial system. The tablets meticulously document this local supply chain. We can follow the journey of barley from the field to the storage silos, where it was carefully measured and sealed. The use of cylinder seals pressed onto clay bully securing storage jars was a critical security measure, a physical guarantee that the grain reserve, the community's insurance against famine, remained intact and accounted for. The same precise tracking applied to the flocks. Records detail breeding cycles, wool yields, and the allocation of sheep to different shepherds, transforming the wandering herds into a managed, productive asset. This was not an isolated outpost. The archives show evidence of vibrant trade with nomadic pastoralist groups who would exchange their animals and animal products for the grain and manufactured goods produced at the estate. This symbiotic relationship wove the nomadic tribes into the settled economy, creating a flexible supply chain that could tap into the resources of the entire steppe. One specific tablet brings this entire system into sharp focus. It is a straightforward inventory of a warehouse taken after the harvest, listing precise volumes of barley, emmer wheat, and other stores. This single document is a snapshot of security, a quantification of the estate's ability to withstand the coming year. It represents the culmination of a year's labor, a bulwark against the uncertainty of the climate. How did rural estates like Tel Sabai-Abiad contribute to and depend on the broader economic systems of their time? They were the essential capillaries feeding the imperial heart. They supplied the wool for textiles and the grain to provision armies and cities, while depending on that same empire for protection, for access to traded goods like metals and tools, and for the administrative framework that made their meticulous record-keeping possible. This archive provides a vital view from the periphery, proving that the strength of an ancient economy often rested on the resilience of its most remote outposts. The gentle, predictable pulse of the Euphrates was the true accountant of the city of Turka. Here, on the river's middle reaches, clay tablets from the Old and Middle Babylonian periods document an economy that was both deeply local and broadly connected. The Turka archives, studied by scholars like Olivier Wald, reveal a society where the river's bounty and its dangers dictated the rhythm of life, and where strong tribal and family bonds were the bedrock of all commerce. These are not the records of a distant, impersonal empire, but the legal texts, administrative lists, and personal letters of a community whose survival was tied to the land and the water. They detail the movement of grain, olive oil, and pottery, and the critical communal management of the irrigation canals that made agriculture possible in the first place. At the heart of this local administration was the Rabbianum, a mayor-like figure who acted as a mediator, overseeing disputes, validating contracts, and ensuring that the complex web of water rights and land use functioned smoothly. The tablets show how the economy was woven into the social fabric. Records of land sales and inheritance disputes reveal how property and resources passed through generations of families, creating stable, long-term supply chains for agricultural goods. Commodity loans, where a farmer might borrow a quantity of barley to be repaid after the harvest, show how capital and risk were managed within the community. This local network was not isolated. Other tablets provide clear evidence of trade with powerful neighbors like Mari, detailing the exchange of slaves, livestock, and crafted goods, integrating Turka into the wider regional economy. One beautifully preserved contract makes this system tangible. It is a lease for a date palm garden, a document that specifies the exact terms under which a tenant could cultivate the land and the share of the date harvest owed to the owner. This single tablet captures the entire life cycle of a vital commodity, from the careful tending of the trees to the eventual distribution of the sweet fruit, a process entirely dependent on the intricate irrigation systems fed by the Euphrates. But the river was not always a benefactor. The same archives that record abundant harvests also hold evidence of the floods that could wipe them out, forcing the community to adapt its economic practices and record-keeping to account for these environmental shocks. How did the environmental specificities of riverine cities like Turka shape their entire economic existence? The answer is written in every line of their clay records, a testament to a society that learned to build its supply chains in harmony with the relentless, life-giving flow of the river. A city straddling two worlds, Karana stood as a quiet linchpin in the imperial machine. The Tel al-Rima archives, a collection spanning the Old Babylonian and Middle Assyrian periods, uncover the steady, vital pulse of a provincial center. Here, far from the royal capitals, the flow of goods was a matter of daily ledgers and local agreements. Archaeologist David Oates revealed how these tablets, a mix of letters, legal texts, and economic accounts, paint Karana as a crucial nexus. It was a place where the agricultural wealth of the surrounding villages was gathered as tax, bundled into caravans, and sent onward to power the great cities of Ashur and Babylon. This was the connective tissue of empire documented in clay. At the heart of this local trade network was the Bet Karim, the merchant's house. This was not just a family home but a bustling trading post and warehouse combined. It served as a secure node where goods could be stored, contracts negotiated, and caravans provisioned. The tablets found within these structures show a surprising level of economic agency for women, who are frequently named as active business partners, managing textile production and engaging in loans. Their seals pressed firmly into the clay, authorizing transactions that moved commodities through the city. The management of storage was a science in itself. Records detail the careful accounting of grain silos and warehouses, tracking the incoming taxes in kind, everything from barley and wool to livestock. These stores were the city's buffer against famine and its reserve for funding public works and paying its officials. A single transaction captures the entire system in miniature. One tablet simply records the payment of a specific weight of silver for a shipment of tin. This brief note connects the local economy of Karana to the vast international tin trade, a chain that stretched from distant mines to the bronze workshops of Mesopotamia. What does the continuity and change across centuries in these archives tell us about local economies? They possessed a deep resilience. While empires rose and fell, the fundamental need to move goods from village to city, to store grain, and to finance trade endured. The provincial dynamics of Karana show that the true strength of these ancient supply chains often lay not in the grand palaces, but in the quiet, consistent work of merchant houses and local administrators. Before a single wedge was pressed into clay, the temple scribes of Kofaja drew pictures. In this ancient Sumerian city of Tutub, the archives offer a rare glimpse into the very dawn of economic recording, a world where the line between a drawing of a sheep and the number 5 was only just beginning to blur. These tablets from the early dynastic period are written in a pictographic script, the direct ancestor of the complex cuneiform that would later dominate the region. As archaeologists like Henry Frankfurt first realized, these were not primitive doodles. They were sophisticated tools, the foundational code for running one of humanity's first large-scale organizations, the temple economy. The entire system revolved around the the high priest, who was far more than a spiritual leader. He was the chief executive officer of a divine corporation, responsible for managing lands, herds, and workshops, all dedicated to the city's god. The supply chains he oversaw were local, intricate, and vital. The tablets meticulously document the flow of staples from the surrounding countryside directly to the temple storerooms. We can trace barley from the harvest, measured in standardized units, into the granaries. We see records of dairy production, listing quantities of milk and cheese from the temple's own herds. And we follow the shearing of sheep, with the raw wool allocated to workshops where it was spun into yarn and woven into cloth. This was a classic redistributive economy in its purest form. The temple collected the surplus, and then it became the great redistributor, allocating these resources back to the community. The archives detail precise bread and beer rations issued to the priests, artisans, and laborers who served the temple, their daily sustenance directly tied to their work. One specific tablet makes this system breathtakingly personal. it is a simple list, a daily ration document, detailing the exact allotment of bread for a group of temple personnel. Each name is recorded, and next to it, a pictograph of a loaf and a series of marks denoting the quantity. This single record is a snapshot of the entire economic cycle, from the grain field to the baker's oven to the hands of a worker, all coordinated by the temple's administrative machine. But this economy was not entirely self-contained. The Kaffaja tablets also hint at trade beyond the city's walls, noting the acquisition of stones, metals, and other exotic materials from neighboring regions, likely in exchange for the temple's surplus textiles or agricultural products. How did these earliest temple economies lay the foundation for everything that followed? They established the fundamental principle that complex society requires meticulous record-keeping. The need to manage the god's estate created the first bureaucracies, developed the first standardized measurements, and ultimately spurred the evolution of writing itself from pictures into abstract script. The Kaffaja archives are not just records of grain and sheep. They are the birth certificate of economic administration, capturing the very moment a society learned to count its wealth in order to build its future. The fertile fields of Gersu were laced with canals, a man-made circulatory system that gave life to the city. In the heart of the state of Lagash, clay archives from the early dynastic and Ur-Roman III periods capture the daily rhythm of an economy built on water. These are not the records of long-distance merchants, but the granular accounts of a society mastering its environment, documenting every basket of grain, every load of reeds, and every fish pulled from the labyrinthine marshes. Sumerologist Dietz Otto Edzard noted that these tablets are particularly famous for their detailed legal disputes, revealing fierce conflicts over water access and land boundaries. Such arguments were not mere squabbles. They were high-stakes legal battles over the very resources that powered the entire supply chain, proving that economic control began with ecological control. At the center of this managed landscape stood the Insi, the city governor, and the powerful temple administrations. They orchestrated a constant flow of commodities, meticulously tracked on clay. The archives reconstruct a complete supply chain for fish, a vital protein source. We can follow the catch from the marshes where specialized fishermen worked to the central administration that processed and distributed it. One specific tablet makes this tangible, recording the delivery of an immense quantity of fish from the marshes, likely salted or dried for preservation, and later distribution as rations to the city's laborers. The same precise tracking applied to reeds, a humble yet indispensable resource. Harvested from the waterways, reeds were used for everything from building materials and baskets to the very styluses scribes used to write these very records. The system was maintained by organized labor gangs, large groups of workers assigned to the perpetual task of dredging canals and repairing levees. Their work, documented in ration lists, was the essential upkeep that prevented the fertile fields from turning back to dust or floodplain. This local economy was not entirely closed off. The Gersu tablets also contain evidence of trade reaching beyond the marshes. They note the arrival of exotic shells and copper from the Persian Gulf, items that entered the local supply chain as luxury goods or raw materials for craftsmen. Within the city walls, another crucial industry hummed. The archives detail the role of women in textile production, managing workshops where wool was spun and woven into cloth, a valuable commodity that could be traded or used to clothe the state's dependents. How did environmental management become such a critical component of these ancient supply chains? The answer is written in every line of the Gersu records. The economy was not separate from the land and water, it was an extension of it. A breached canal meant a lost harvest, a failed fishing season meant hunger, and a dispute over water rights could paralyze an entire region. This archive reveals the most fundamental layer of all, the undeniable interface between a thriving economy and a carefully managed ecology. The rhythmic clatter of looms echoed through the workshops of Naga, a sound as fundamental to the city as the beating of its heart. At Tel Brak, the ancient name for this metropolis in the Khyber Plains, clay tablets meticulously documented this industrial pulse, transforming the city's economic life into a permanent record of production and trade. These archives, spanning the 3rd and 2nd millennia before the Common Era, reveal a society that had perfected the art of turning wool into wealth, its fortunes woven into the very fabric of the ancient world. From both temple and palace storerooms, the tablets map a supply chain of astonishing complexity, tracking the journey of a single fleece from the back of a sheep to a distant market hundreds of miles away. The city's strategic position was its greatest asset. Nestled on the crossroads between Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and the Levant, Naga was more than a producer. It was a crucial hub, and its records, as described by archaeologists like Joan Oates, are saturated with the evidence of this cross-cultural exchange. The entire system began with the raw material. Tablets detail vast allocations of raw wool, measured to the smallest weight, being issued from central storerooms to teams of weavers. These workers were not a disorganized mass of laborers, but highly organized crews, often managed by overseers whose job was to ensure both the pace of production and the quality of the final product. The records show evidence of this quality control, with different grades of cloth being noted and accounted for separately. A bale of fine, tightly woven textile destined for a royal court was a different commodity altogether from a coarse blanket for a soldier's ration, and the scribes of Naga knew the difference. To manage the flow of these finished goods, especially for export, they relied on a system of trust and verification. Cylinder seals, the unique signatures of merchants and officials, were rolled across the damp clay closures of bales and sacks. This mark was a guarantee, a brand that authenticated the contents, assured the buyer of its quality, and tracked the shipment's ownership as it moved along the trade routes. One specific tablet brings this entire international operation into sharp focus. It is a shipping manifest, a simple list recording the dispatch of a large consignment of textiles from the warehouses of Naga, bound for the royal city of Mari on the Euphrates. This single document connects the looms of the Khyber Plains to the palaces of a major kingdom, a tangible link in a supply chain that clothed empires. What factors allowed Tel Brak to maintain its economic prominence for centuries, weathering the rise and fall of neighboring powers? Its longevity lay in its mastery of a valued craft and its irreplaceable position on the map. It adapted to changing political landscapes by serving whoever controlled the trade routes, whether it was the kingdom of Mitanni or the rising power of Assyria. Its product was always in demand, and its location made it the logical place to produce it. The city did not just make textiles, it perfected an entire system of production and distribution, proving that economic specialization could be the most durable form of power. A merchant in Larsa weighs a silver ingot, the universal currency of a booming economy. We return to this city during its golden age under King Rim-Sin, a time when archives from both royal storehouses and private homes document an economy exploding with ambition. These are not just lists of goods, but the living records of a market in motion. They capture contracts for daring sea voyages down the Persian Gulf, loans of silver extended to farmers planting vast date palm orchards, and daily ledgers that track the shifting prices of barley and wool. Economic historian Mark van der Meerup points out that this was a world where silver was the common tongue of value, a universal standard that allowed for complex calculations of profit and risk across vast distances. This was capitalism in its earliest, most vibrant form. To read these tablets is to reconstruct the supply chains that made Larsa rich. We can follow the journey of its most famous exports. Dates harvested from countless groves were packed into containers and shipped downriver. Sesame, crushed into precious oil, was poured into jars and sent to distant markets. In return, ships came back up the Gulf and the rivers, carrying raw copper for the city's metalworkers and ivory for its artisans, linking the workshops of Mesopotamia to mines and hunting grounds thousands of miles away. Overseeing this frenzy of commerce was a powerful official known as the Wakil Tamkari, the chief of merchants. This was not just a title, he was a regulator, an arbitrator, and a facilitator. His office guaranteed the standards of weights and measures, settled disputes between traders, and ensured that the caravans and ships operated within a framework of law and custom. The tablets show his hand everywhere, from authorizing trade missions to certifying the quality of goods. The market itself was alive and responsive. The archives preserve clear evidence of price fluctuations, where the cost of a basic commodity like barley could rise and fall based on the success of the harvest, the arrival of a large caravan, or the disruptions of warfare. A conflict with a neighboring city could make a trade route unsafe, causing the price of imported tin to skyrocket overnight. These were not abstract numbers, they were the daily reality for every merchant and consumer in the city. One contract perfectly encapsulates this spirit of enterprise. It is a partnership agreement for a trading expedition to Tilman. Two merchants pool their silver to finance a ship and its crew. The contract stipulates how the profits from the sale of their textiles will be shared upon their return, and what happens if the ship is lost at sea. This single tablet contains the entire DNA of long-distance trade, credit, risk-sharing, and the hope for reward. How did the economic practices of this one city ripple out to shape the future of the entire region? The commercial laws, the financial instruments, and the very concept of a market economy refined in Larsa became a template for later Babylonian empires. This archive captures a fleeting moment of commercial brilliance, a testament to the timeless human drive to build, trade, and prosper. A provincial governor's seal pressed into clay could redirect the entire wealth of a region. At Jor-Katlamu, a key administrative center on the Kaba River, the Middle Assyrian archives reveal the cold, efficient machinery of an expanding empire. These tablets are the operational logs of a provincial headquarters, detailing the systematic absorption of a conquered land into a unified economic system. Every shipment of grain, every herd of cattle, and every drafted worker was a thread being woven into the imperial tapestry. Archaeologist Hartmut Kuhn describes this as a process of ruthless integration, where local supply chains were dismantled and rebuilt to serve a single master, the Assyrian state. The records are brutally pragmatic, filled with administrative reports on tax collection, lists of military supplies, and directives for managing vast agricultural estates now under imperial control. A central pillar of this strategy was mass deportation. The archives contain chillingly matter-of-fact lists of people uprooted from their homelands like Hanagalbat and resettled here to work the land or labor in workshops. One specific tablet makes this human cost starkly clear. It is a simple ration list detailing the distribution of barley to a group of these very deportees. They are reduced to entries in a ledger, their survival a calculated expense in the empire's plan to break old loyalties and create a pliable, dependent workforce. This was supply chain management as a tool of domination. The entire local economy was reoriented to feed the imperial machine. Tablets meticulously track grain shipments from provincial silos to Assyrian army units on the frontier. They count the animal herds, specifying which were destined for temple sacrifices and which were to be butchered to feed the garrison. The oversight of this entire system fell to the Shaknu, the provincial governor, whose palace at Dur-Katlamu was the nerve center where all these economic threads converged. His scribes documented everything, and in a telling sign of changing times, some later tablets begin to show the use of the Aramaic language alongside the traditional Akkadian, hinting at the growing influence of the Aramean tribes with whom the Assyrians both traded and fought. How did such imperial expansion permanently transform local economies and supply networks? It erased their independence. A network that once served a local community was forcibly recalibrated to serve a distant capital, its resources diverted, its people moved like pieces on a board. This archive does not just record commerce, it documents the very mechanics of empire, the relentless process where conquest was solidified not just by the sword, but by the stylus and the clay tablet. A Babylonian merchant's contract could set a ship sailing for a foreign port 1,000 miles away. The Neo-Babylonian archives from cities like Sippar and Babylon capture the vibrant pulse of an economic renaissance in the first millennium before the Common Era. This was not a simple revival of old ways, but a new chapter in the ancient story of commerce, marked by a deeper reliance on silver as the lifeblood of all transactions. Assyriologist Michael Jerser's work reveals a world where silver was not just a precious metal, it was true money, a universal measure of value that streamlined trade on an unprecedented scale. This monetized economy enabled everything from small loans to vast, state-sponsored enterprises, creating a financial sophistication that feels remarkably familiar. At the heart of this system were powerful family firms like the Ejibai family, whose extensive private archives read like the corporate records of a modern multinational. They managed vast agricultural estates, financed trade caravans, and even engaged in early banking activities, lending silver at interest and managing investments for a wide clientele. Their success was built on complex trading partnerships known as the Haranu. These were not simple agreements between two people, but intricate joint stock ventures where multiple investors would pool their silver to fund a major trading expedition, sharing both the immense risks and the potential rewards. This practice allowed for capital to flow toward ambitious projects that no single merchant could have financed alone. The supply chains these merchants managed were truly global, stretching from the date palm groves of Babylonia to the bustling ports of the Mediterranean. Royal policies actively encouraged this, with the Persian imperial road system providing safe, reliable routes for goods and information to travel across continents. One specific contract makes this global network tangible. It is a detailed agreement for the shipment of a massive quantity of dates from the city of Borsippa all the way to the Phoenician city of Tyre. This tablet does not just record a sale, it documents an entire logistical operation, implying a journey by river barge to the Gulf and then by sea-going ship across the open waters. To ensure such long voyages were profitable, the economy became fiercely specialized. Certain regions focused entirely on producing specific goods for export. Vast estates dedicated themselves to cultivating dates or wool, not for local consumption, but to feed the insatiable demand of international markets. This crop specialization required immense planning and a deep understanding of distant market prices, all coordinated through the constant flow of letters and contracts pressed into clay. What innovations truly anchored the success and longevity of this remarkable economy? It was the powerful combination of a stable silver-based currency, sophisticated corporate structures, and the leveraging of imperial infrastructure for private gain. These archives do not just mark the end of our journey through 30 clay tablet collections. They bring us to the very threshold of the classical world, where the economic patterns first etched in Mesopotamian clay would be inherited and transformed by the empires